So welcome everybody. Today we make space for Sheila and the other Roundtable to bring an important topic to the table. Today it's about the retrofitting of the EU housing stock. The proposal came from Sheila. She's seeing this parallel between what is happening in the south of the world and what is happening in the north of the world. And talking about this transition that is already happening, the priority that Sheila sees there is about bringing people in the middle of the transformation. Thank you again, and Sheila, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I began a concept of working around what community women want. And one of the first things that the women from informal settlements in the global south asked me for was to consider the challenges of addressing vulnerable housing materials, bad designs that could not protect them in the face of extreme weather, too much heat, too much rain, too much wind. So we started a campaign called Roof Over Our Heads, which is now an official campaign of the Race to Resilience towards 2030. And in the Global South, our goal is to produce new strategies, new designs, and new projects that will help community people undertake improvements in their homes, in their neighborhoods, and work with their cities to address disasters and produce resilient transformations of their homes. The idea came to me that just as we have a campaign called Roof Over Our Heads to address informality, that we should have a campaign called Retrofitting for Resilience to address energy changes, upgrading of housing material used to upgrade and improve housing stock in the north in ways that poor communities and poor neighborhoods can participate as active participants in this, and that it's not just a contractual agreement between a company that will come in to do the repairs and changes and the local government or the national government. And I hope that the resources and the involvement of the New Bauhaus process would include this.
I'm Jan. I'm a trained landscape architect, and here in this panel, I'm representing Bjarke Ingels. One of the issues that we have incurred in the past, or still are incurring, is that the accessibility of the information. So if any new proposal is made at the moment, in Europe, we go through a public participation process where we put non-technical people in front of technical drawings and in a technical representation of what we are trying to achieve. And that's, I think, where it already goes wrong, because in our practice, we are very much focused on figuring out how to communicate those proposals in a much more accessible way. I think what we can aim for is to create environments, virtual environments, that help people to really feel, as much as possible, feel a spatial condition or an improvement or a change in a virtual world before we actually get them to commit in a real world, and enable them to have an opinion that's actually based on an experience that is accessible.
I'm Cassie from C40 Cities. So at C40 over the last few months, we've been doing a number of activities on trying to increase the rate of retrofit and reduce energy demand and provide relief to citizens in European cities. So we've really realised that the calls for action need to come from science, for workers, and from then the representatives of cities. And these calls were based around what we call the 3 R's of relief, retrofit, and renewables. So knowing that huge numbers of citizens are suffering from energy poverty in our European cities at the moment, and so they require direct relief. But in order to really tackle future numbers of energy poverty and growing ones, then we need to accelerate investment and action on retrofitting building stock and building out renewable energy within our cities. The current rate of retrofit in Europe is around 1% for building stock, and saying that needs to be accelerated to 3% immediately. From this project, I'm super interested in how we can take some of those big citywide asks and actually then embed them within the communities within the cities that we know are the most vulnerable to the energy price volatility, but also to the impacts of climate change. So really interested how we could bring those two elements together, and we're really happy to offer our campaign or project as a kind of contributing piece.
So I'm Hubert Troman. I'm member of the Roundtable of the European Bauhaus. And in Poland we have already various programs of retrofitting, so it is quite often that people change the windows not as the whole house, but every family in their apartment. And in Bulgaria and Ukraine I have observed the further situation. In Poland, sometimes in very small towns in a village, that also adding insulation on facade is done not to the whole house, but individually to the people for their apartment.
I'm Tanja Berger. I'm a senior research fellow with Danube University in Krems in Austria. Low-income households tend to already restrict their energy consumption to the minimum, which is known as a rebound effect when it comes to cities, that energy poor households tend to live in specific neighborhoods that are that comprise badly maintained and low quality building stock, for instance. On top of this, of course, we have the long-term goal of decarbonizing our basically entire societies, which may inflict investments and costs on low-income households who are already now struggling to pay their energy bills. And this raises a whole bunch of issues, which I want to just mention four. First of all, I think that we see this decarbonization of building stock will require such a huge retrofitting activity that it really that can lead to distortion of the markets, and at the moment we simply do not have the trained personnel to do all that. Secondly, especially when it comes to rental housing in Central and Western Europe, we have that well-known landlord versus renter dilemma, in which the landlord is supposed to invest into something that basically mostly profits the renter, so limited motivation on the landlord side, a limited agency on the renter side. We see the sheer physical and mental burden that retrofitting can have on people who are living in a building that is being renovated and have to live with the noise and the dust and whatnot during at least 1 year or so. And finally, I would also like to call our attention to the issue of heat. Summer heat will be a big issue also in Europe, and already now heat is a silent killer even in Europe.
My name is Cédric Demeus. I work for Holcim. Holcim is a construction material provider. What this discussion brought to mind, really, if you put yourself in the position of the communities who are in need of retrofitting, they're always the same question that are being asked. What are the solutions that I need to put in place in order to get the faster return on the investment? If I can make the investments, who's going to do it for me? Who has the skills to do that? And where do I find the finance? How do I finance this retrofitting? I was therefore wondering whether the Bauhaus could be the host of, let's call it a resilient retrofitting academy, where these academies, resilient cities academies that would really target the more vulnerable parts of the population, would have national chapters where you put together solution providers, you put together those who have a detailed know-how on what are the financing mechanisms that are available, be it laws, be it subsidies, be it whatever form of finance, and where you could even think of a skills development. It's basically about facilitating the access of information and facilitate decision making and bringing it to the people as opposed to leaving them finding out. So a resilient retrofitting academy that we could roll out through the Bauhaus. Just an idea.
We have, so next year will be now the European Year of Skills, and there might be also an opportunity to do something in the construction sector and to really see if we cannot have a pilot project with NEP partners, you know, who are into, for example, retrofitting, and who could then we could also then identify some big companies and maybe, you know, establish a first pilot where we just very stupidly go and teach since ever a huge agreement on the challenges and the issues and so on, and I'm then always more trying to find at least some first things, you know, that we could do, which are for sure not ideal and not enough and everything, but maybe can be a start of something bigger.
I'm an architect and I'm doing urban planning, but I have an institution. It's a foundation, and we are doing a lot of implementation with local communities. So I think in this conversation, I'm kind of I want to add the perspective of the bottom-up communities. My work, I'm mostly interested in we are working in rural areas. And in this project or in this topic, we are talking about these vulnerable communities. So for me, this is a really huge challenge. How can we really find the good ways to really get to those vulnerable communities and really be able to help them and, you know, and make an impact there. My other second big challenge is that we really have to work on better way of communication, how to reach out to these communities. And one channel can be this issue with how to, I don't know, make it more understandable, and we can work on virtual and digital forms, but we really have to work on, unfortunately, on offline formats, because when COVID was happening in these small towns, you know, I mean, I know a lot of communities who doesn't even have, you know, internet. They couldn't really participate in the digitalized system. We had to go there and bring them things on paper. So this is also an issue for me. How can we communicate in a more effective way with those communities?
From my perspective as economist, I'm very keen to be part of the discussion to see and discuss with you all if we are thinking about what kind of business model we should use to implement and develop this practice, and what is the role of the communities. I'm very keen to know, and also I would like to give my support, and what is the financial perspective we would like also to bring on the table for implementing this kind of activities and project focus on retrofitting the resilience of housing. Thank you.
In the roof over our head, our goal is to have 100 such pilots in southern cities, which are centered around locations where there are huge vulnerability challenges, and to produce, with the help of universities, of building material networks, local organizations, these kinds of pilots. So the pilots are based on what is the need of that locality. But because of the range of solutions that come out, the academy, as you call it, now we are going to call it the Academy of Knowledge, then has demonstrated evidence of the transition and the transformation that comes out, but also the human aspect of the negotiations, the conflicts, the estimation, you know, the different perspectives by which you do investigation of what is the investment needed, what is the return on investment. These have to be done in very simple languages, so they become popular knowledge that people can can discuss, and it doesn't stay in the realm of the designers, the architects, the energy providers, or the material providers. You know, in this campaign of Roof Over Our Heads, we've realized that we first need to inform very different, disparate, geographically and in professional terms, a different range of people who come together to find solutions. And the design of the solution has to be one which is very locally specific, but based on some international global principles of participation, of energy transitions, of bringing long-term value to people. You know, so there are both principles that we have to put together, but also practical applications. And I think the real challenge for me is how do you get disenfranchised communities of vulnerable people who live in these houses to understand and value this process so that they can make these demands? Because like in many situations, people feel very disempowered. People say, oh, who's going to pay for it? We can't afford it. But on the other hand, we know in every continent and every country, there are programs that are meant to do these things, of which poor people don't know anything about. So also informing them, anchoring this process somewhere. So if there is a way by which within the new Bauhaus movement, there is some way to anchor this process, pretty much the way that you and Lorenzo and others have anchored a discussion amongst all of us. If there's a way by which this could be done to take this process into more details, into more localities, and have different people take up different kinds of interventions that are then pulled together is, I feel, a very important segue forward.